Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I have an announcement to make about this afternoon's programme. Unfortunately, Ruman Chowdhury is unwell and she's unable to join us this afternoon. As you know from your programme, hers was to be the last keynote. So we will be closing the conference early, in fact. For now, though, we're going to move to the next session, which is the panel discussion, Partnerships in Practice. And the panel experts we have with us this afternoon will explore the opportunities for partnerships inside institutions within the sector and with external partners, and explore what makes for successful collaboration. I'm actually going to hand over to Anne Roster, Executive Director at SCONUL, who will be chairing the panel this afternoon. I'll hand over to Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, I'm delighted to welcome a stellar panel of speakers to discuss what is, in effect, our core conference theme this week, which is developing and delivering expert partnerships. There's some serious expertise up on this stage with me, so I'm feeling very humble. I'm going to give each of them the most brief of introductions, and I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about their own expertise and area of interest in this sort of sphere before we open up to questions from the floor, which is in fact the main purpose of this discussion. So you are definitely participants in the whole session. So first of all, I'm going to welcome Sue Williamson, who leads Libraries for the Arts Council England. One thing I noticed that unites all of our speakers is that they have an interesting background and experience beyond their current roles. And in Sue's case, she was had a career in public libraries before joining the Arts Council, most lately as head of library service for St Helens Borough Council. Jill, on my right, is Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion and Head of Student Support Services at the University of Stirling, where she's been doing a really interesting range of campaigns, including one we were talking about last night, which is the Is This OK campaign on sexual violence, which I think we should share more widely. Her previous career was actually in sport, equality and diversity in the sports arena, including for Glasgow 2014. And on my far right is John Chambers, who is from the Archives and Records Association UK and Ireland. And his previous life was in the charitable sector, working for mental health, physical health and advice charities, in fact running those charities, that's right, isn't it, John? So he's had experience in quite a different framework. And last but by no means least, Liz Jolly, who probably doesn't actually need much of an introduction from me, Chief Librarian at the British Library, former Director of Student and Library Services at Teesside University, and also an honorary professor there. So I am going to ask each of them to say a few words, and I'm going to start over there. We're going to go this way, if that's all right. And then we're going to open up to questions from the floor. So over to John.
Thanks for calling me Stella, that's a first. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 25 years trying to build partnerships, develop them and keep them going, whether they're long-term or short-term. I think when they work, they can deliver something which can't be delivered by the individual organisations working alone. However, they are fraught with problems, they can go wrong, and so I've got some experience of that, which is why I think I'm here.
We shall investigate that point later.
Oh, hello everybody, it's great to be here, and I feel very humbled with all the words that have been used as well, and a bit scared to live up to expectations now actually, but my career has been quite varied, higher education, sport, qualities and ethics, but I think there's recurrent themes running through all those different sectors, and the need to work in partnership and to collaborate has been critical. So I think some of the skills and experiences that we've had to develop along the way to do that around influencing and understanding shared value and the evidence base for why partnerships are important have been recurring throughout all those different partnerships. So yes, I'm really interested in hearing what people want to hear about, and hopefully being able to share some of my experiences, some of which have been positive and some more challenging.
Hello again. I'm It's a very short session, isn't it? And those of you who were here yesterday will have heard my experiences some of my experiences in partnership working, and what the benefits that the British Library, which very much believes in partnership working, believes are. And I think that whole idea about learning from each other, about supporting each other, about co-creation with our communities as well as colleagues is the most important thing. And actually doing what we're saying we're doing, putting partnership at the heart of what we're doing. No one profession has the answer to questions of what we're here for, why we're doing it, of enabling learning, teaching, research, enterprise, and whatever our mission is. And definitely, as the British Library values put it, we definitely can do more together than we could do by ourselves.
I echo what the rest of the panel have said. In my career in public libraries, I became very aware of the value that public libraries bring as partners. They make excellent partners because they're always looking at how they can make themselves relevant in their communities. And one of the things I think that public libraries maybe don't do is value what they bring to the table, which amongst other things is the huge platform they offer and the reach they have into the heart of the community. I think that's particularly becoming relevant in an academic setting through the changes to the knowledge education framework. Having moved out of being a practitioner and gone to work from the Arts Council, I tend to think of myself a bit like a spider in the middle of the web. I'm the one who brokers conversations, who tries to bring people together, who tries to develop and see the synergies that can make people work together for everybody's benefit in the interest of promoting library services, whatever library services they might be.
Well, thank you very much. Now, we're going to open up to questions from the floor. And I've got one if you're not quick. So, can I have hands up? I can't actually see either.
Glasses on.
Is that Jane? Could you say who you are, Jane? I know, but not everybody does. Thank you.
Jane Harville, University of Sussex. I'm interested in coping mechanisms, I guess, for when things go wrong in partnerships. And I'm particularly thinking about archives, and we've done work with our local archives, and it's difficult when partners have issues with funding. So I wonder if anyone had got any examples or anything they wanted to share.
John, you actually mentioned, I think, partnerships being, I think your quote was fraught with problems. So it sounds like you've been on the bitter end of this. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got some experience of when it goes wrong. Usually I think it's, in my experience, to change in personnel. Somebody leaves and somebody comes in who's not been properly briefed or isn't as committed. I've not really been involved in a partnership where funding has been the problem. But I think my experience is that scenarios haven't been thought through, organisations haven't committed fully to the partnership that they're actually going into and realised how long-term it might be, and they've used change, and I think that's where problems start, and where problems start, and if they're not resolved quickly, it leads to the end of the project if you're not careful. So I don't know if the funding issues, I've talked to them, and if the funding is becoming the issue, then perhaps it's the commitment to the project as well, which might not be there. I don't know if the personnel have changed.
Does anyone else want to pick up on those?
I think that it's, as with anything, as with technology, as with change in general, this is about relationships. And I hope I didn't make my talk yesterday everything I've ever done. So it sounds like everything I've ever done run really smoothly and great. And I think things do go wrong. And I think reflecting back on why they went wrong, sometimes there isn't money, but as John said, sometimes it's about failure to commit, about not having clear objectives, and about not making sure that your shared objectives, that you have a shared understanding of those shared objectives and timescales and what it actually means to your organisation. And at root, these are issues around us communicating clearly with each other. They are all people issues, and those relationships, in a partnership, whether it's just 1-2 people or 2 organisations or multiple organisations, they are at the crux of whether things run smoothly or not.
Yeah, can I absolutely agree with what Liz has said. I was sitting in a forum recently where somebody said, would you say there was trust on both sides? And the silence that followed was deafening. And so clearly, there was no trust. Trust had either been eroded or undermined in some way, and it was a big issue. Funding is an interesting one. I would have thought that actually if you're going to go into partnership with somebody, there needs to be some kind of underpinning memorandum of understanding or agreement about where that funding is going to come from and what the resource is before you embark on whatever it is that you're going to do. I've never actually been in a partnership where that hasn't been the case before we started out.
So is the funding of the project the issue, or is it that other funding that they're saying is the issue because they're trying to work on that?
Well, it's a big partnership. It's a partnership with the county council and with the city council,
Right.
2 local councils who have obvious funding issues. So I mean, I would say it's the governance of the partnership that is at fault.
So not clarity about common objectives and frameworks.
I mean, it's very difficult. It's a long-term partnership.
Yeah, I think I would just really sort of echo this and add to this. I think something about shared value and about real transparency about that at the beginning, because the partnerships that I've been in that have maybe broken down, it's been because we all thought we were working towards the same outcome and objective, but actually when the chips were down, it became clear that our motivations were quite different. So I think planning from the beginning and getting all the people together, partnerships are often a big jigsaw puzzle of different people, to spend that time on planning, to be really clear about what is their why and why we're there, and understanding a bit about each other's motivations. I think that makes it easier that when conflict arises, you can at least deal with it respectfully with some sort of evidence and understanding of each other. If you realise that your motivations are very different halfway through, I think that becomes quite difficult to then overcome.
I'm starting to hear a kind of a question about skills arising in this discussion, because you've talked about advocacy skills, communication skills, actually negotiation skills. What do you feel are the suite of skills that you need to lead a partnership? Liz and I, this is picking up a conversation Liz and I had in the bar, but it's about whether you need different kinds of leadership skills for a partnership working than you might do for a more traditional structure. Shall I make you answer first? Because I know you've been thinking about it.
I actually think they're the same leadership skills. They are around clarity of vision, around communicating that vision, around inspiring. Those Cousins and Posner, characteristics, honesty, forward-looking, inspiring, all those things. But then also being able to generate that shared understanding. I think if you're leading people in your organisation or your department where you hopefully already have shared values, shared mission, vision, and all that sort of thing, you and even in your profession, you assume there is a common understanding. I think as librarians, and I've said this before and several times in several contexts, in several different ways, we assume everyone speaks our language. And we are very, very good, I would say in general, at cooperating and collaborating with each other. We are not quite so good, and I will own that I haven't been quite so good at actually collaborating either with our community, with my community in the past, or with other departments in the institution I've been working in, or with other professions. And that whole thing about speaking the right language, about not making assumptions about what your priorities are professionally or organisationally and what other people's priorities are, about actually listening and learning, and that is good leadership practice anyway, but I think it's even more important when you're working with new partners.
That speaks to your point, Jill, doesn't it, about clarity and transparency.
It does, and I was just thinking about how I totally agree with what Liz has said, and I would probably characterise that as respect for diversity and an openness to learn, because when I think about some of the partnerships we've been involved in, that I've been leading, it's been often working with students and Students' Union, who are, you know, typically, couldn't tell you how many years younger, a lot of years younger than I am, and I think there's sometimes in academia a bit of a hierarchy of who's important and who knows what and who knows best, but actually being able to be open to learn and to have respect for the diversity of opinions that students and other partners can bring has been so important, because we all have learned from each other. You know, these are our service users, and these are people that are living that, you know, that lived experience of what it's like to be a student. So, you know, bringing them in to help co-create has been really, really important, and I think it's been fundamental to being able to influence the funders and the policymakers in the senior management team as well. So, yeah, respect for diversity.
The one thing which hadn't been said is so far is patience. I think if you're involved in leading a complicated partnership, you need endless patience, and you need to keep reiterating everything which has been agreed, and I think you need to, as has been said, respect everybody who's around the table and treat them as equals. If they're in a small organisation, their view is as important as the large organisations. If somebody tries to dominate, it's not going to work. So equality and respect and endless patience.
Sue, do you want to add anything?
I think that's absolutely right. I think patience is a huge virtue in this area. And the one thing that I will say, actually, in terms of partnership, is that I kind of think in today's society, today's organisations, we can no longer work in a way that doesn't include partnership working. And actually, I mean, I came along to your conference this morning, not knowing, or today and last night, not knowing very many people here, not really understanding some of the issues, but it's made me realise this morning, as I've been listening, just how many issues we have in common in terms of public libraries and academic libraries. And actually, in terms of spreading resources and making them work for us, there's a huge amount of crossover and synergy that could help both areas, I think, tremendously. And I've learnt that from this conference. So,
I'm really curious about you guys out there. So most of you are leading services, either being a head of service or as part of a leadership team. How many of you think of yourselves as engaged in an active partnership, either inside the institution or beyond it? Can I have our hands up, please? Wowza, that's most people, actually. And leave your hands in the air, right? Put your hands down if you think it's working perfectly. Okay. Put your hands down if you think it's mostly working. There's some hands still up. Right, I'm going to start picking on the audience. Power. So, for those people who feel it's not working, what's not going right for you? Can we have comments from the floor on that?
Cathy Philpotts, London Metropolitan University. I think some of our partnerships go back to historic agreements from eons ago. And in terms of the capacity we have within the library service, we haven't got a lot of capacity to review them. So we just keep sailing along with the historic agreement, which isn't necessarily suitable for today's world, and things have changed an enormous amount. And I find, and some of the partners I'm talking about are external partners who've deposited collections with us, and we're looking after them. So we're looking after them well,
yeah.
But they have an opinion that universities are loaded with money. Will you pay for a member of staff just to look after these collections? No, I can't. In difficult times when we're reducing staff and having to have a very strong rationale for keeping the staffing going. The looking after the collections, kind of sitting there, is one thing, but they're not catalogued, all of them, etc., all those common problems. And it's quite difficult sometimes when you only come together with these people once every 6 months, and they say again, will you pay for a member of staff?
So this sounds very much like those sorts of questions about how do you know when it's over? Like a bad relationship. How does one see the signs that say it's time to think about this afresh, time to let go? I don't know, John seems keen. Let's give it.
So is it that you know there's problems but you haven't got time to deal with the partnerships, so you're just ignoring it and carrying on?
We haven't got time to go back to the formal agreements, even if we're sure what they were in the first place, and they're a bit woolly. So some of that formal agreement stuff, I could have the staff turn over the entire university archive looking for the agreement, but I think it's a waste of time. We haven't really got time to go back to starting afresh when the agreements were started. We were running a wash with staff, and there were lots of people to sit and to have committees. Whereas now, I'd have to close the main library and to bring the people together to make the committee to discuss what's needed.
I was guilty of ignoring a problem that I knew about with the partnership, and that partnership wasn't really working for either side. So what really happened in the end was we got dumped, because they decided to do something about it before we did, and really we should have done something about it first, because it ended in tears and we lost out. So I would encourage you to try and do something about it while you can before it turns around and bites you.
There's lots of nodding. Yeah.
I think it's really important when you're developing a partnership to put time limits on, or whether that's just a review or an end. I mean, you can argue that projects are partnerships in some way, aren't they? They have quite clear time boundaries. When we started the Northern Collaboration, which is 27 of the 28 university libraries in the north of England, we were clear that we would come back and review every 3 years at the time, look at our terms of reference and look at the agreement and give people the choice of whether they wanted to continue it or not. And I think we were very clear that we had to be benefiting the student experience in our universities. We had to be delivering value for money, both to the collaboration and to the broader, to our institutions. And when I left as chair last year, and we were very clear that the minute that stopped, then the collaboration would stop. So I think managing expectations when you start a partnership is, looking back on some of my mistakes, really, really important too.
I think an awful lot depends on the level of pain this is causing. So, I mean, if you meet once every 6 months and it's one day of going to bed the night before thinking, I've got this meeting tomorrow and they're going to ask me the same question, and then that's it for 6 months. That's one thing. But I think if you're in a bad partnership where it's causing a lot of stress for a lot of people, it's taking up a huge amount of your time to unpick this, to constantly field things that are not going right, then I think somebody has to pick it up and say, this is enough. We have to bring this to an end. And that actually is going to depend on whether you feel you're the right person to be doing that or not. And I would say probably if it's causing you a lot of problems and a lot of hassle, then you are.
I mean, for me, sometimes there's a couple of things that I've tried, and sometimes more successfully than others. Sometimes it's really about changing tack and bringing in different evidence, and sometimes bringing in different champions that you know are going to influence the person that you've got the blocker with. That can sometimes help. If all of those things are not happening, though, sometimes it is about the personalities. And there's been times when I've had to pause, wait, and when that personality has moved on, go back to the next personality, and sometimes with a different argument. So this is, yes, you can't achieve this, I know you're upset about this, but could we try something different? Is there a different role for you in this partnership? And that's worked a couple of times. It's not, okay, the original outcome, yep, we can't achieve that, but we can really see a value for you somewhere else. So sometimes that works.
Refocusing questions of value. I want to pick on the audience again. Now, there were some people out there who, when I said put your hand down if your partnership is perfect, did actually put their hands down. And I think it'd be really interesting to share, both from the floor and amongst the panel, some examples of where things are working really well and why you might think that is. So who would like to talk about their favourite project? Come on, you know you've got some. Judith, you are an example of a really interesting project that's working very well, I think.
Thank you. So yes, I'm the University Librarian at Worcester, where we have shared public and academic library, and we also have the county archives in the building as well. And I think it's fair to say 7 years after opening that we are generally working well, and I'd absolutely echo what has been said, because we had really clear understanding of what we were trying to achieve. I think what Liz was talking about, what did we need to get out of it for each side, and we just thought through everything in as much possible detail as we could in advance, what might be the issues, just trying to troubleshoot in advance. But I think what's happened going forward is there is just this really strong commitment still to making it work, and we just commit to trying to find a way through. But it is difficult when you get somebody new coming in and you sort of house train them almost. That can be challenging. And there are days, I must admit, when I wake up and think, I wish I was running an ordinary library. But for me, and I think it's just a question I put to Liz yesterday, for me, what we can do in partnership is so much more than we could do separately. It's worth the pain, actually, so far. Yeah. So, but it's that real understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and I think somebody else said reiterating that, and just keeping going back and reminding people why you're doing it.
Can I come back to the panel? What are your top favourite partnerships you've been involved in, the ones that feel really like they delivered?
Can I start with a positive for a change?
Yes, please do.
The positive is the UK Archive Services Accreditation Partnership. So this is 7 organisations around the UK which came together a few years ago to offer a quality mark for UK's archive services. This is where patience came in. It took 2 years of negotiations, and one of the partners at the very last minute brought up an objection which they'd clearly been sitting on for a long time. And this is where everybody did show superb patience, I have to say. We dealt with that issue, and we had buy-in throughout all of this from the senior leadership in the 7 organisations, and everything is documented. There are memorandum of understanding between the various partners. They've just been reviewed, and again they've been reviewed at a senior level, and they're going to be reviewed again in a set period of time. So there is a continuing involvement of leaders in the 7 partner organisations. Everything is in writing, and it is working really well.
Interesting.
I would probably point to the "Or Is This OK" campaign that Anne had mentioned. This was a campaign, but we particularly looked at a social media campaign to raise awareness of tackling and preventing sexual violence, and it's a bystander campaign essentially. But the reason I think that worked well is because we genuinely had buy-in from all of the different groups that developed that strapline in the campaign, and we used their assets really well. So we really listened to the student voice, but we brought in organisations such as Rape Crisis, who understood from the survivor perspective. We brought in our marketing team to help us understand about how messages would land and what pitfalls to avoid. So we just planned and really worked on that together. And when that was launched, we got all the students and staff to share that campaign, and they did a bit like the Ice Bucket Challenge. I suppose they all got each other involved and nominated each other, so it felt like it belonged to everybody in the community. It wasn't something the senior management team had written in some dusty cupboard and posed on the university. It came really from the bottom up, so now people feel they have ownership of that. So I think that's why that one worked.
I have lots of partnerships that I could talk about that are going really well, not least with Liz here on the side, and the partnerships we've got with the British Library around the Living Knowledge Network in public libraries and the Business and Intellectual Property Centres in public libraries are absolutely outstanding and are delivering huge value in the network of public libraries. But in terms of perhaps a much smaller one that I'd just like to go into detail about, because Liz might want to talk about those. When I was working at St Helens, I don't know if any of you remember, a report was done called the Lost Boys Report, which talked about young boys going to school and having very, very poor communication skills. And St Helens had the dubious, what's the word I'm looking for? Honour, the dubious honour of coming out top in that report. And in our library service, we worked with the speech and language therapists to develop a partnership whereby we provided the resources for them to train teaching assistants and special educational needs assistants to deliver a specific language scheme using picture books to develop communication skills. And I think because that was a groundbreaking partnership, it had not been done anywhere else before, and it was so successful and has been, we've taken it around the country and talked about it such a lot. I think for me, that's probably one of the partnerships, but it's only one that I could detail that have been really, really satisfying in terms of delivery.
Thank you, Sue, for those very kind words. I dwelt on Living Knowledge Network and the BIPC yesterday in detail. So I think for me, the thing that I have enjoyed most of all, or that there are two things. One is the Northern collaboration, and I have to say that, you know, whatever people, whether the future of the shared virtual inquiry service as a national system stays, at the time for us, developing that from scratch on a regional level was a learning experience, a bit of a helter-skelter ride, and actually, and yet it was fun. Actually, what I want to say is I enjoyed that. That was one of my favourite working experiences anyway, because it was fun. We had a laugh doing it. Sometimes we were laughing because the alternative was to cry. But I would also say that, again, we had clear objectives. We had to work with a supplier. And we also, there was a lesson for me around letting go. We had a vision, Sue White from Huddersfield and I, around a shared virtual inquiry service. And in my head, it was going to operate very much in the way that the single point of contact had worked at my previous employer, and it was going to do this, this, and this, and this, and it was going to work in this way. And over time, I had to learn that actually, as long as we attained the vision, the outcome was what we wanted. How we got there and what the detail was less important. And for me, there was a real lesson in letting go, not abdicating responsibility, but letting go of some quite cherished ideas around what a virtual inquiry service could be. I suppose the other thing was working at Teesside, where we did a project on, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, we introduced reading lists and our discovery system as one project. They were chaired by academics. We involved students in there. We used modified print. And they stopped being library projects, became learning projects. And actually, particularly around reading lists, had a ripple effect on university-wide processes, on involvement of students in their learning, and change in the institution as a whole, as well as actually delivering on what we set out to do. And we were seen both as the library, as good change leaders, and of people who could deliver projects in budget and on time.
Right, I'm going to come back to the floor for further comments and questions. There's one here, just in the middle. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruth Jenkins, Manchester Metropolitan University. So we're part of Archives Plus. The North West Film Archive is within Archives Plus, and we've had huge benefits, massive benefits from that in terms of widening audiences, the synergies of the co-location and all the rest of it. And we, you know, the library, the Central Library in Manchester is an amazing space. It's now 5 years old. The partnership is obviously older than that, but the space and the service is 5 years old. And we've gone beyond the end of the funding for that, and most of the senior colleagues, senior stakeholders in in the local council and the universities that are partners in that and the other organisations have completely changed since it was all created. And going back to John's point about people changing, one of the things I'm really interested in is how to continue the momentum and engage those senior people who are now quite different people than the ones who originally signed up to it, and get their continued support for that.
Oh, interesting. John, you already said something about, repeat the messages. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's too late now, but when the project was being planned, it could have included succession planning and signed up the partners to commit to persuading the incoming CEOs and other managers of the benefits of the project. I think you're going to have to do a sales job on it again. So you start from scratch almost. This is why we've got into it. This is the benefits we've had. And get them to sign up and commit, and then maybe have some kind of mechanism where when they leave, there is a process to indoctrinate their successors into the project. Because thinking back over the projects that have gone wrong that I've been involved with, it comes down to change in personnel, most of them. So I think that is the crucial thing which has to be addressed in the project planning, getting the commitment of the organisations that they will review their involvement and they will get their senior team committed into it. I mean, one project for me was working really well. Mental health charity and Citizens Advice Bureau, we were working together to take advice to people who couldn't get out of their homes because of their mental illness, agoraphobia or whatever, and faced losing their homes because they couldn't attend meetings. So we were cooperating with our mental health training and specialist knowledge in mental health, with the Citizens Advice Bureau's specialist advice skills, bringing it all together. And it worked really well, and then I left. I came to this job, and my boss took the opportunity to reorganise the senior management team, and nobody took responsibility for that project. And a year later it shut down because the CAB just got so upset and angry that they pulled out. So a successful project just failed just because of one simple thing. So a bit of a long answer, but I think it is a crucial thing that you're going to have to just make sure you address now, and then make sure what you do now is done for the future.
That raises an issue for me, which we haven't really talked about very much so far, which is the question about value and evaluation, and how you embed that in a project so that the arguments later about advocacy or having to repeat the same kind of rationales. How do you see that in terms of the projects you've run? How have you kind of taken an approach to kind of measuring its value and its delivery?
So I would say that's an area that lots of partnerships and projects fail on, and certainly something that I have learned from. A strategy that we developed 3 years ago, which was our tackling sexual and gender-based violence strategy, I think we haven't done very well on that in terms of valuation, because it was actually because personnel were leaving. Those that were the researchers for that project moved on, and lo and behold, by the time we got new people in, we were way past the stage where we should have had that baseline data, and that has caused us problems in terms of being able to measure impact. But then you just have to start from somewhere. So in the new project that I'm leading in a similar way, which is our mental health and wellbeing strategy, I've been really, I guess, wedded to the idea that we have to have an evaluation framework from the outset before we go in and launch into that, because I don't want to make that same mistake again. So again, it's been looking at evidence, the same themes that I've been saying all the time, and bringing in your assets. So we've got a rich pool of people in our university that are really good at data, they're really good at statistics and research. So we've been bringing them in, make sure that we can use their expertise to develop that framework, because that's certainly not my area of expertise. So yeah.
Do either of you want to comment on that point?
I would just say if it's not going to bring benefits, then perhaps we ought to question why we're doing it.
I agree.
Yeah. Any further comments, questions? Ruth?
I don't want to give the wrong impression. This is a really successful partnership. It's just about how to ensure the continued success. And we have done evaluation, and that was in from the start. We've got lots of evidence and so on. But we do have a potential risk with new senior people coming in. That's all. So.
Yeah.
The success that I referred to, the Archive Service Accreditation, all of those organisations are bought into what they will commit to the project, and they can't get out of it. So any successor coming in can see the documentation, why they're doing it and what they're committed to, and they're committed. So that's worked. If I'd done that in the previous project, that probably would have worked there too.
Yes.
I was just going to say, I think Liz's point about building in regular reviews. So, you know, this is what we've said we're going to do. This is what our aims and objectives are. Are they still the same? Do they need reviewing? You know, do they need developing? Because actually, if you've been doing something for 5 years, you might want to change it a bit and grow it. But so if it's going to be a very long-term partnership, I think it has to be flexible and fluid and adaptable. A lot of, I mean, and I think there are two very different models if you're going to have a partnership that you want to go in perpetuity, or if you want to have a partnership to deliver a particular project which has a short-term life. So I think it's slightly different if you're doing the latter.
Right, I'm going to do one last straw poll. So those people who put their hands up originally, that they have a partnership, could you put your hand up again? Right. So we have some rules now from the panel, which we're going to test. How many of you had a very detailed conversation at the beginning about objectives and expectations? Right. How many of you think you have clarity, honesty, and a shared vision in terms of those objectives? Very good. How many of you wrote all that down? Okay. Okay. How many of you have a time-limited or regular review as part of that written down Greek document? So far, it's just Judith.
And one more.
And someone in the back. Someone in the back. Have you come to it with patience and commitment? I know you have. Yes. Do you think that Judith put a hand down? So, do you both feel? It's just two left. That you have gone into that partnership with a sense of strong respect, equality, respecting diversity of experience and expectations. Just Judith. Have you got user involvement? Did you have user involvement in the design of the project? One. So I'm going to say, Judith, then that you must have that set of skills that the panel have described, which is leadership, extremely effective communication skills, strong advocacy skills, and that you have come to your partnership with clear measures of success in evaluation and delivery. So a big round of applause to you. And
can I just say, it is a team, it's not just me.
I know. But can we also say a huge thank you to our panel for bringing their expertise to this conference and to this discussion. Thank you.